Mishnah Nun Vav Amid Beis 56b. We learn like this: Almana L'Kain Gadol, talking about a prohibited union, a widow to a high priest, Grusha v'Chalutza L'Kain Hedyet, or a divorcee or a chalutza to a regular priest. Those are forbidden marriages. So minha erisin, if it's just from the time of the betrothal, so we say la yochla b'truma. She's not allowed to eat truma already. He cannot feed her. Yeah, he doesn't become puzzle. He's still a kohen. Well, there's two possibilities here. And this is the complication. What are we dealing with? Are we dealing with she's a bas kohen, and she can't go back to her father's house, and she can't eat from her husband. She's forbidden to her husband. When she marries her husband, she would be prohibited. She would become a halala. She would become prohibited from eating truma. Yeah, so there's a possibility here that the pshat is that she can't eat from her husband as if she's a halala. She can't eat from her father's house because she's already been betrothed.
She can go back to her father's house. She just can't eat truma any longer.
Right. Right. That's the opinion of the Tanna Kama. The Gemara is going to tell us that that's Reb Meir's view. Rabbi Lezer v'Rab Shimon machshirin. Rabbi Lezer and Reb Shimon. Rabbi Lezer ben Shemua is a friend of Reb Shimon. He's one of the 5 students of Rabbi Akiva. They both say that because she did not consummate the marriage yet, so she's still permissible. She's not a halala. She was about to be a halala, but she's not a halala yet. So if that's the case, so whose truma does she eat? From her father's house or from her husband's house? I guess from her father's house. Yeah, I guess from her father's house. Okay, let's go further. Nesar Malay Neskarshu. Let's say she was widowed or divorced. So if it's now, in other words, the marriage has ended. Okay, this prohibited marriage has come to an end. So then, if it's minan suin, if it was a full marriage, then of course psules. Then she's already a halala. She was forbidden to a kohen. She married the kohen. She became prohibited to a kohen because of the marriage, right? Actually, she was prohibited to the kohen before, but she was never a halala. Now she's a halala, so she's psula from eating truma, even if she doesn't have children, and she goes back to her father's house. She still can't eat truma. And mina erisin, but if it was only a betrothal, so even Reb Meir that held that she was prohibited from eating truma because she was set up she was about to commit a marriage. She was about to have a marriage that would make her prohibited. But now that it's over, she goes back to her father's house and she can eat truma. Yeah. There is one other pshat over here. Another pshat over here which Rashi is going to bring, which Rashi says is the main shot, is that there's a rule. It's a Gemara in Ksubas. It's called the Mishnah Rishayna in Ksubas. Over there it says that if a woman is betrothed and they set a date for the actual wedding, and the date comes and he doesn't marry her, she becomes permitted to eat truma if he's a kohen. He's a kohen. He's betrothed. He betroths this girl, Abbas Yisrael, right? Father's not. From the marriage date, not only from the actual wedding, from the date of the wedding, she already becomes permissible to eat truma. Yeah. Now, if that's the case, if that's what we're accepting, then one of the pshatim of the Mishnah could be this: the date arrived. If it was a prohibited marriage, she cannot eat truma according to Rabbi Meir. Because what's going to happen? When is she allowed to eat truma? From when the marriage is consummated. When it's consummated, she's going to be prohibited. So the wedding date is not going to make her permissible. Reb Shimon and Reb Elazar have a different view. And their view is that when does she become prohibited from truma? From when the marriage is consummated, from the relations. But now she's not prohibited yet. It's just the wedding date. And from the wedding date, she's already allowed to eat truma. Yeah, when the wedding is going to actually take place, she's going to become prohibited. But she's already acquired by her husband enough. She's already in the domain of her husband enough to be eating truma from the date, and she's still not prohibited yet until the marriage is consummated. Yeah. So Reb Meir sort of puts the two together, and Reb Shimon and Reb Elazar divide it up. Rashi says this is the main pshat.
In English, is there a term for halala? Anyway,
I don't know. I don't think so.
that's a unique status.
Yeah.
The intention of a vow, which is various.
No, where does the vow come in here? Because a betrothal, you're saying is a vow? Oh. Yeah, here we're talking about like an acquisition, where when does the wife become part of his family? So it comes from, well, really it's from the Kedushin, but the sages say that the Kedushin has a problem because we don't want her to take food back to her family if her family isn't Kohanim. So she can't eat from the husband's house until the date of the wedding. Yeah.
That's when the invitation's printed up.
No, that's when
The date of the wedding.
the date of the wedding. Yeah.
Wedding.
Okay, so basically, yeah.
Phrase halala, in this case applies not just to somebody who has a problem because of her parentage, somebody who has a problem now because of betrothal.
Yeah, but it's more that the betrothal doesn't turn her into a halala. It's the relations with someone that's puzzled to her that makes her into a. She wasn't allowed to marry. Right now, she's just a grusha. No problem with the grusha. Marry anyone.
She didn't really have relations. She
Right.
had a date.
Yeah, well, no, she's not really a halala. Even according to Reb Meir that says she can't eat truma, she's not really a halala. Reb Meir just puts the two together and he says that what's going to happen? She's mishtameres lebiyas avera. She's waiting to do the sin. We're not going to give her the. Yeah, that's Reb Meir's view.
Waiting to do the sin.
It's like the Gemara Erevin. So we didn't understand the Reb Meir's views, so we didn't pass like him. Okay, basically what comes out here is we had two pshat in what we're dealing with. One pshat is we're dealing with the Bas Kayin, and is she getting messed up that she can't go back to her father's house to eat over there? Or we're dealing with the Bas Yisrael, and are we letting her into her husband's house to be able to eat truma, or are we saying that no, when she gets into the husband's house, she's going to be puzzle anyway? Those are the two approaches to this Mishnah. Okay, Tanya, start in the Brisa. The Brisa is going to give us some extra details of the conversation between Reb Meir, which is the Tanakama, and Reb Shimon and Reb Elazar. Amar Reb Meir says, Kal v'chaimer. I'll tell you Kal v'chaimer why she should be prohibited. Ma kiddushi rishus ein ma'achilin kiddushi avera lekolshkin. Now we have the two ways of learning this. Let's start with one. If it would be a Yisrael marrying a Bas Kayan, when he does the Kiddushin, she does not eat anymore, or he does not feed her truma. He doesn't feed her truma. He's the new husband. She stops eating truma. He doesn't feed anyone truma. Forget about this, right? He doesn't eat truma. So, Kedushi Avera, that would have been a permissible marriage. If in a permissible marriage, she doesn't get truma. Kedushi Avera like Kolshkin, when it's a prohibited marriage, for sure she doesn't get truma. Here it's she's a widow. To the Kohen Gadol, she's a divorcee. But because of here, he's a Kayan. If he wouldn't be a Kayan, and this would have been a permissible marriage, she would not eat truma. Now that it's a prohibited marriage, because he is a Kayan, for sure she doesn't eat truma. The response to that argument is the following. It's they tell him back, Loi, Amr Loi, they say to him, Loi, what are you saying? In a permissible marriage, he's a Yisrael. He never gives anyone truma. If it would have been a different woman, he would have fed truma. So this woman as well, he should feed her truma. It's prohibited, but he didn't have the act yet. Should already start to feed her truma. He should not I jumped to the other shot. He should not invalidate her from eating truma in her father's house. Yeah, the second shot would go like this.
Is it that, or is it that she is losing a right that she already has as opposed to gaining a right she doesn't have?
Yeah, that's those are the two pshatim. Is she losing a right? Yeah. What's the do you have a commentary there? Do you have I'm wondering what the commentaries do. Which one do they put in the notes and which one do they put in the which pshat do they put in the translation? Are we saying that she in the text itself? Which one is the more simple pshat? Are they saying that she loses her rights from her father's house because of this marriage? Or are they saying that she's not gaining the rights to truma from her husband's house because of this marriage? Because this marriage is about to be performed. Yeah, it could be both.
How is she going to find a rabbi to marry her if it's a prohibited marriage?
Yeah.
You just do it, right? Or the acts, right?
Well, it could be it's a erison. It could be there was no rabbi, just two witnesses.
You're going to find two valid witnesses that agree to this.
Yeah, they didn't know.
I think it says it like similar to the way The alternative interpretation, which Rashi himself first considers, is that our Mishnah refers specifically to a non-Kohen who betrothed a Kohen's daughter.
Yeah.
And the issue is whether such Yerusins disqualifies her from the Kohanic privileges of her parental home. Hence, Rav Meir would be reasoning here that if Israel's betrothal to a Kohen's daughter, causes her to lose her right to eat teruma, then certainly the Kohen's forbidden kedushin should cause her to lose that same right. Rashi, however, rejects that interpretation for two reasons. Firstly, the Brisa should not speak of kedushin not entitling her to eat, but rather of disqualifying her from eating. And then secondly, the Gemara below explicitly relates this dispute in our Mishnah to the case of the Kohen with the wounded or crushed testicles. Well, that's
we're going to see the problem. We can't get into it till we learn it. Yeah, we'll learn the problems with the different pshatim. But so they're learning in the text that we're talking about that he's a kohen and she's not a kohen. That's the text, and then there's another pshat that they're putting in the notes. Okay, so they're accepting. When Rashi says "v'hul oshenika," they're accepting what Rashi claims is the main pshat. That the question over here is if she's considered married yet to her betrothal at the date of the wedding, and if she can start eating truma, even though if this continues on, she's not going to be allowed to. That's the issue over here. So now the Gemara says, one second. How do we do this? Kedushay Rishus. If it would have been a regular Yisrael, she wouldn't eat truma. Now that it's a kayan, that's prohibited. She doesn't eat truma also. They said back, one second, a regular Yisrael doesn't feed anyone truma. This is a kayan. If it would have been someone else, and it's not a divorcee, then he would have fed her truma. So this marriage should be considered already, this wedding date should already be the marriage, and she should already be able to eat truma. They didn't commit the sin yet. They didn't live together yet. So that's their claim back to Rav Meir. Yeah.
Who can nullify her vows after she's still living in her father's house?
It depends what her age is. If she's 12, then I think that you need both. And if it's over 12, then it would be just the husband, I think.
Even though she's living in her father's house.
I think so. I'm not sure. Yeah. 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 If it's a valid marriage, if it's an acceptable marriage. Yeah. Truma caterers.
That's right.
Yeah, it's a little cheaper.
So in this scenario where Meir is more machmir than
Reb Meir is more machmir, right? Okay.
I think Bria had that.
Yeah, I don't know. Amar Rabbi Lazar, Amar Rabbi Shia. Rabbi Lazar says the name of Rabbi Shia. Ptsua daka kayin shekidish bas Yisrael banu lemachlekes Rabbi Meir Rabbi Lazar Rabbi Shimon. You gotta. This is a difficult question. What's going on here? You have a kayin. You see, if someone was castrated, it's crushed testicles or some other accident or procedure that was done to a kayin. That was done to anyone, actually. First, it was done to anyone. He's not allowed to marry a girl from the congregation. Who is he allowed to marry? Convert. No, someone that wasn't from the congregation. Okay, now, can you marry a mamzer? Possibly, I don't know. A mamzeres, right? Mamzeres.
Wait, this Cohen can marry a convert, a regular Cohen.
No, one second. If it would be a regular person that had this accident or procedure, it would only be allowed to marry a convert. Okay, now we're complicating this matter by saying that this person with the procedure, with this defect is a Kohen. A Kohen is not allowed to marry a convert. Where's this fellow holding right now? He has two contradictory issues. This is like the guy with the bag of pills. Takes one for this, but that pill affects that. So he has to take another pill you never end, like this is the back and forth of it. This person is in a very complex situation. So here we're dealing with where it was just a betrothal. All right. Kohen, he's a Kohen, he's a Ptsua Daka. He betroths a Jewish girl. So Banul Machlekes Rameya Reb Elazar Reb Shimon. This is actually a Machlekes. What's the Machlekes? She's waiting to live with a man that she's forbidden to. Reb Meir, the Mishtameres will be a Psula Deiraisa. According to Reb Meir, that says that any girl that's waiting because the betrothal took place, maybe the wedding date also, is waiting to be married to a man that she's forbidden to, lo yachla, so she doesn't eat. So hanami lo yachla, she also can't eat truma. She can't. She's not allowed to consummate this marriage. However, Reb Elazar Reb Shimon, according to Reb Elazar and Reb Shimon, they say 1 second, she's still permissible. Remember what they said. So the wedding date arrived. She becomes under his sort of domain. She can already start eating the truma. She's not yet prohibited. So she's still hanami achla. So she can eat over here as well. Here's a statement from Reb Elazar in the name of Rabbi Shia that does an interesting comparison. Just like the wedding of a Kohen to a woman that a Kohen is not allowed to marry, so too the wedding of a Kohen to someone that no one is allowed to marry has the same status. It's a comparison here. That would be the same issue. Wow.
If this was a Kohanic dynasty family, and the first Kohen, Reuben, died, all right, and Shimon had this situation,
yeah.
he would
That's an
only could do
interesting.
chalitza, right?
Yeah, I guess so.
Because
Yeah.
that wouldn't make sense.
Right. For two reasons. Like
One, he can't-
shame. I think we had a pass. I think we had that before once. I think we said that only the one that could establish the name. I don't remember. I think we brought it up once.
Yeah.
But the doctor's asking if it would be a case of Yibam and he was a Pitsua Daka, how would that work? We can't do it, but I don't remember if we actually mentioned it.
But you do chalitza.
It's do chalitza probably. Yeah. Okay. The Gemara has a question on the comparison. Mimai, how do you know that this is a good comparison? Dilma adkan like Kamir Rabbi Reb Shimon Hasim el Diesh lahachal b'makam acher. Aval hachadein lahachal b'makam acher light. Maybe remember Rabbi Elazar and Reb Shimon's claim to Reb Meir. They said that a regular Kohen that marries a regular woman, she would start to eat truma. So too, this woman also should start to eat truma. When do we say that? By someone that could actually marry another woman. But this man cannot marry another woman. So maybe we should say that even Rabbi Elazar Bar Shimon, that's Rabbi Elazar and Reb Shimon, that say that in the first case in the Mishnah, where it was a Kohen that wasn't allowed to marry a divorcee over there, but he's allowed to marry someone that's not a divorcee, so the divorcee should also be able to eat truma. But over here, there is no other woman that he's allowed to marry. Why not? Marry a convert. Well, he's a Kohen. There's no one available. Maybe you can say he can marry the children of converts. Well, that's a gray area. That was a question that Rabbi Shia didn't give an answer to. The convert themselves, the Kohen is not allowed to marry. What about the children of converts? Would that be acceptable? And are they considered See, the other issue here is that they considered the kahal, the children of converts, considered the congregation. And here we have a ptsua daka, someone that's castrated, that's really is not supposed to marry anyone from the congregation. Are they allowed to is such a person allowed to marry the child of a convert? That's a very difficult question. And we don't have an answer to that. So we're going to say that maybe Rabbi Lazar and Rabbi Shimon would not do this comparison to say that she should already be allowed to eat truma just because a divorcee would have been allowed to eat truma. Okay. Itmar. It's funny, we only went one way over here. We didn't deal with Rameir. We have a statement. We're continuing in this discussion. Abaya mahayla machila b'layada. Abaya says, I have a scenario where there's a man that's castrated, that he's able to still remain married to his wife, and he can still give her truma. How does that happen? Well, you have a Kohen. He marries a woman. Everything is fine. Then sometime along in the marriage, he becomes castrated. Now, if he lives with her, that's a problem. Yeah, that's not really, let's hope. Let's hope. That's not going to affect this fine detail that we're dealing with. Is she allowed to eat truma? Eat from his kitchen that has truma food in it. If he lives with her, that's a problem. But let's say he doesn't live with her. They're just married. So she's in the household. She can still eat truma. So what are you telling me? What are you telling me that this Kohen cannot feed anyone else truma because he can't really marry anyone? I'll give you a scenario where he can feed truma because he was married already, and then he was castrated, and he just doesn't live with her again. So he can still continue to feed her truma. Yeah. Rav Amar, Rava says, I'll give you another explanation, another scenario. What are you saying? He doesn't feed anyone truma. He does. He feeds his servants truma. He just can't feed his wife truma. But why? Because whoever is going to marry is going to have a problem. But he can feed his servants truma. So therefore, in this case also, Kedushin was done. The wedding date arrives. Let's say that's the shot over here. And he's not allowed to consummate the marriage. He's not allowed to marry. But she should already be able to start eating truma. You're going to tell me, but he never gets anyone to eat truma? Yes, he does. Either according to Abaya, if he would have been married, etc., or according to Rava, his servants. Abaya leyamar Rava. Why doesn't Abaya say like Rava about the servants? Kinyan the ishas yalfinan. We were discussing marriage. You're telling me about servants. That's not a comparison. Rava doesn't say like Abaya because that's not a good example. Because in that case, she started eating before, and so she continues to eat. But you're giving me a case now where she was not eating before, and you wanted to get started on eating truma. That is not a good comparison. Abaya. How did Abaya make a comparison about a man that was married already? And then he becomes castrated. And then his wife is allowed to continue eating truma if he never lives with her again. And that's going to be a comparison to when he's marrying initially a woman that she should start eating truma. Abaya says that's not a question for me. Starting, stop, continuing, that doesn't matter. Starting and continuing, according to Abaya, is the same thing. Yeah. If you don't say that it's the same thing, if you think that continuing to eat truma is something easier, is something that you say that, yeah, once you started, you don't stop. If that's really a thought process, that starting is like, that just continues naturally. And that's why the man that was married to that was married to a woman and then became castrated, that she can continue eating. If you're going to say that svara, that continuing just happens naturally, then let's say there's a woman that's married to a Kohen and then the Kohen dies. So she goes back to her father's house, right? Without children. There's no children. So she doesn't need truma. Why not? She started, she should continue. If you say that continuing is just what happens naturally. Abaya says, we don't say that you continue. But Rava says, basically what he's saying is that this logic of once you started, it's easier to continue. Abaya rejects that. He says starting and continuing is the same thing.
But the Bas Kohen, who essentially started and then gets married, if she didn't marry Kohen, it doesn't continue.
Yeah, she stops.
Right.
Okay. What we're saying is like this. We had we're making this comparison between a man that's castrated. He's a Kohen. He's trying to marry this woman that he wouldn't be allowed to marry. But because the marriage date came, she should already start to eat truma. Problem is that this man never really has anyone eating truma. So how does he, right? You're going to compare it to the case of the Mishnah, where if it's a divorcee that he's marrying, she already starts to eat truma. But over there, that's because his other wives would have started eating truma if they weren't divorced. But this man can't really marry anyone. So you don't have an example of him getting anyone started. So we said like this, 1 second, it's not true. This man would have someone eat truma. You know who he would have? If he was married already and she's already eating truma, and then he becomes castrated and he doesn't live with her again, she continues to eat truma. Abaya says that's not a good example. Abaya says that is a good example. Rava says that's not a good example because over there it's continuing. And over here, you're trying to start initially. Abaya says, I don't make a difference between continuing and starting, because if I did make that difference, then I would say that if the husband passed away, she should continue eating truma. I don't say that there's a difference in continuing and starting. The continuing is not easier than starting. For Rava says that example that you just brought me, that says that we don't say continuing to eat truma is easier, that example, because when the husband dies, Hasam paka kenyana, achle paka kenyana. That's because the whole ownership, the whole domain, the husband's estate is finished because he passed away. So there is no more husband there. So she doesn't continue to eat truma. But over here, there is a husband, and he's married to her. The wedding date arrived, so she should be able to eat truma. Rav is saying, but over here, she's eating truma because she's continuing. Over there, we don't say continuing because he just died. But over here, to say continuing is not a problem. But to say to start, Rav says that's a big problem. Okay. Kufa. We're going to go back to discuss the question that we mentioned before that Rabbi Yochanan asked Rabbi Shir. This is regarding if the children of converts are considered the congregation. Yeah. Has to do with certain marriages. Let's say an Egyptian convert was not allowed to marry into the congregation for the first 2 generations. Who would they marry? Another convert. And then on the 3rd generation, they could come in. I'm sorry? Yeah. No, nothing wrong. It's just there's a rule that if they're Egyptian, today we don't have Egyptian, and Yisro was probably a Midianite. But if it would be the Erev Rav would have had an issue marrying into that congregation on the first 2 generations. They would marry with each other, and then the 3rd generation they could marry in.
They didn't make it past the first.
Yeah, not necessarily did they make it. That they were in the desert. Wasn't a simple situation. Okay, What about, let me ask you a question. What about, there was a whole question about King David. Was Rus allowed to marry into the congregation? She was a Midianite. So we say that a Midianitess is yes allowed to, not just not a Midian, not a Moabite woman is allowed to, but not a Moabite man. Yeah, so that's what we're dealing with over here. Why is it relevant to us? We're talking about a man that's castrated is not supposed to marry someone from the congregation. What about the children of the converts? Let's take a look. You'll see. Yeah, he makes it into a very interesting question. He marries a baskerim. Can she eat truma? Right, and he has, yeah. Rabbi is quiet. He doesn't respond. Rabbi was the great. This is Rabbi Rabbah, probably. This is Rabbi the author of the Tosefta.
Where is he?
He would be on the very top of the. You see this column that has Rabbi Yochanan in it in the center. The Amoraim of Israel.
Isn't Reb Chia the student of Rebbe?
Yeah, he's a friend of Reb Chia. Yeah. So Rabbi Shia the Great is asking this question. That's what I believe. Rabbi Yochanan. No. Look at the top. Is there a top?
Is that the right card?
Yeah, Rabbi Shia.
Yeah.
He's a student of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi.
In my crease.
Right up there.
Oh, he's little print.
Yeah, that would make
It
sense.
just doesn't work for whatever reason.
Yeah.
I don't know what the Gemara's definition is.
What is it? What was the question?
If you are taken off the distance and you still have the like the Pharaoh's women, there used to be guys that watch them.
Oh, yeah.
You still have sex.
But not children.
No, they could still have sex with the women.
But
I forget the words.
the Sarisim. Yeah, but they were castrated. Eunuchs.
Eunuchs.
Yeah, they were eunuchs.
What he's saying is the eunuch can't
Would not
get
be.
the child, but he can.
Yeah, that's not a concern. Yeah, that's what it could be what we're dealing with.
Would they not even have sex because you can't make a child?
No, they weren't allowed to. Someone like that in the community would not be allowed to marry a regular Jewish girl. Would have to marry a convert. Yeah. Today they can, if someone had the procedure, the vasectomy, they can reverse it, and that would be acceptable. Yeah, they could reverse it with micro. Huh? Oh, really? Uh-huh. So here's the question. And Ishtik Lamidi, Rabbi Shia doesn't respond. A great person comes. He asks Rabbi Shia another question. And Rabbi Shia answers him. Umanu, who was that other great person? Reish Lakish, Rabbi Yechanan's brother-in-law. Amalei Rabbi Yehuda Nasiya or Rabbi Shia, Rabbi Yehuda Nasiya. Who's Rabbi Yehuda Nasiya? He's the grandson of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. He tells to Rabbi Shia, why are you ignoring Rabbi Yochanan? He's not a great person. He asked you a question. Why didn't he answer? Amalei the Kabbai Menei Milsa, the Leslie Pashu, because he asked me a question that doesn't have an answer. Laman, who should we follow? Rabbi Shia is the master of the Brises. He says, Ilu Rabbi Yehuda. It's going to be a machlekes over here between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yosi. If he's following Rabbi Yehuda, bein b'kedusha sekai, bein la b'kedusha sekai, lo yachla. Question is, are the rules of the Kayanim, the limitations on who a Kayan is allowed to marry, does that apply to a Kayan that's a P'tsua Daka? Yeah. But whichever way you go, even if you go that it's not, you have a problem there. Why? It goes like this. Rabbi Yehuda has two opinions. He says, first of all, if he still is a Kohen completely, la yachla, damar mar bas ger zachar kebas chalal zachar. The daughter of a convert is prohibited to a Kohen. That's Rabbi Yehuda's view. Even the daughter of the convert, she didn't convert. Her father converted. So he wasn't allowed to marry her anyway. So of course she doesn't need Truma. Okay. Now, if we say, well, he's a P'tuadaka, don't get so holy on me that he wasn't allowed to marry the he has his own issues, which makes him allowed to marry a convert. Okay. But nevertheless, he still won't feed her Truma. Why? The Amrinan, or maybe the Amar, because Rabbi Yehuda holds Kal Geir Mikri Kal. Rabbi Yehuda holds that converts are considered part of the congregation, and he can't marry. He's a P'tuadaka, can't marry her anyway. So whichever way you go about this, according to Rabbi Yehuda, she's not eating Truma. However, Ila Rabbi Yaisi, if you want to follow Rabbi Yaisi's view, it's exactly the opposite. Whether he wasn't allowed to marry her because he's a Kohen, or whether he's is allowed to marry her because of a Kohen, she's still going to eat. Let's say he's a Kohen, he's not allowed to marry a convert. However, the Amar Rabbi Yaisi holds, Rabbi Yaisi has a lenient view. He says that two converts that get married, the child is allowed to marry a Kohen. So she's eating Truma. He married the daughter of converts, which was totally permissible according to Rabbi Yaisi. She could eat Truma. And if you tell me that he has no issue anyway, because he's not considered, he doesn't have the restrictions of a Kohen, but Achla, she's still going to eat. The Amar Kal Gerim Leikri Kal. He holds, if you're going to tell me that there's an issue of P'tuadaka, that he wasn't allowed to marry. So there's a very interesting combination. The daughter of converts is permissible to a Kohen. And the daughter of converts is not considered part of the congregation when it comes to P'tuadaka. When it comes to a man that's castrated that has to marry someone that's out of the congregation, this girl is considered out of the congregation. A lenient view on both sides. It's almost like hard to match that up. You follow? But according to Rabbi Yossi, she's eating Truma. Yeah, that's another point. What about the mitzvah of having children? That's another point. Yeah. Ela ali b'daitana. So what would the question be according to?
Person that's becoming Jewish,
Convert?
bringing fresh blood.
Okay. Indeed. Indeed. David's mentioning that there's a benefit to having new blood in the community for genetic reasons, right? Okay, it's true. Ela aliba de haitana, but it could go according to another view. The Tanan, Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov Aimer. What is Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov? Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov. It doesn't say a lot of things, but we say Mishnase Kavanaki. What does he say? Isha bas Gerim, a woman that's a daughter of converts. If the mother was Jewish and the father's a convert, she can marry a Kohen. And now here's Rabbi Yechanan's question. In other words, Rabbi Yossi says, I don't know how to answer his question, because if he's following Rabbi Yehuda, he has the answer. If he's following Rabbi Yossi, he has the answer. Both of those don't fit together. But where would the question be? The question would be on according to Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov. According to Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, he could only marry the daughter of a Kohen. The Kohen can only marry the daughter of a convert and a Jewish woman. Okay, now let's take a look at this. He has a problem because he can't marry. He's a P'tuadaka. So, what happens to the daughter of the convert in the Jewish woman? She's allowed to marry Cohen, but why? Is it kashrus mitaisvaba ve'achla? Are we saying that she becomes permissible to the Kohen, but she doesn't join into the congregation yet, and therefore she should eat? Why? Because he's a P'tuadaki, is allowed to marry her. Or do we say, or do we say that she becomes part of the congregation, and then she can't eat? What does the mother, being a Jewish woman, do to the daughter? Does it make her just that she becomes permissible to the Kohen, or does it put her into the congregation? And because he has a double problem here, he's a Kohen that can't marry a convert, and he is also a P'tuadaka. So where's this holding? Tashima, come and listen. Ravacha bar Chinna Midraima. Ravacha bar Chinna came from the south. Also, he brought a brisa with him, and he taught it. How do you know that a P'tuadaka, that's a kohen, that he marries the daughter of converts? Probably means the daughter of a convert. That he can feed her chuma. Is that how it's translated there? The daughter of a convert. The mother was, I think, otherwise it wouldn't fit with Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov. Shenemar b'kohen ki yiknen nefesh kinyan kas b'yoichel b'in. A kohen that acquires a soul, kinyan kaspai, which means a servant, someone that he acquires with money, he can eat truma, the servant. But because it has the extra word nefesh, we're coming to tell me, Laman, it's coming to tell me an extra person here, that the convert that he marries, the daughter of convert that he marries, can also eat truma. If you say it's according to Rabbi Yehuda, then she can't eat. According to Rabbi Yossi, she was allowed to eat. It must be that this brisa is following the view of Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, and it's telling me that Rabbi Elazar we had a question when it comes to Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov's view. Do we say that the daughter of a convert whose mother was a regular Jewess, do we say that she is only permissible to the Kohen, but she's still not part of the community, which would allow the P'tuadaka to marry her? Or do we say not? Do we say she becomes part of the community? That's what the mother's addition does. So we say that the mother doesn't add that she should be part of the community. The mother adds just that she can marry a Kohen. Okay, I guess we should leave it here. I'll have to rush through it. Okay. Yeah. Good day, everyone.
Thank you.